Every year, the leaders of the world's 7 most advanced democracies meet at a summit known as the G7. At the summit, they discuss some of the world's biggest issues and come to an agreement on which steps they should take to address them. They tackle big international issues such as pandemics, climate change, and global conflict.
This year, the G7 summit is being hosted by the UK at Carbis Bay in Cornwall. But in order for the G7 leaders to represent their countries, they must hear the advice of their people.
So, there are 6 engagement groups: the Business 7, Civil Society 7, Labour 7, Science 7, the Women's 7, and the Youth 7. Each advocacy group collects the opinions of a wide range of people and makes recommendations to the G7 based on the interests of their group. We are the Y7, the advocacy group run by young people for young people. This year, the Y7 is being hosted by the Future Leaders Network, supported by an implementation task force of young volunteers who are working behind the scenes to make the Y7 happen. But how does the Y7 decide which issues to raise?
Each G7 member state selects 4 young leaders to represent their country. Each country's delegation consults with experts and other young people to identify their top priorities. Following this consultation, the delegates then negotiate with one another to decide on a few key policies that they wish to recommend to the G7. These policy proposals form a communiqué that is handed to G7 leaders in order to push for change. The communiqué is announced at an annual event known as the Y7 Summit. The summit is a chance to champion the voice of young people in international decision-making.
This year, the theme of the Y7 is Making Waves for Future Generations. All future generations of young people will inherit the decisions we make today. So, this is our chance to have our voice heard, disrupt the status quo, and chart a new course. Also, the Y7 this year has 3 core values. They are inclusion, because we want our policy recommendations to truly represent the breadth of the international youth voice. Impact, because we want ministers to hear and act upon our recommendations. And development, because we want every young person who participates in the Y7 to learn and grow from the experience.
The Y7 has been negotiating across 4 main policy areas: the economy, climate, health, and technology. For the first time ever, the Future Leaders Network has created a youth forum, a group of 20 young leaders who have hosted focus groups and organized events to collect the opinions of young people all over the UK.
So what has the Y7 been up to this year? Since January, the delegates have been through an intensive process of training, discussion, and negotiation. Firstly, we held a launch event with the talk from Jonathan Black, the Prime Minister's personal representative to the G7. Then, the delegates began a month of consultations, starting with a weekend of training at base camp on policy making and research. They hosted focus groups and interviews in each of the G7 countries in order to make sure that all young people had the chance to feed into the Y7 communiqué. They also discussed their proposals with industry leaders at a series of Chatham House roundtables.
In March, we held the Ascent Camp. We trained the delegates in negotiation and held a talk with Mark Thompson, one of the UK government's Brexit negotiators. We also invited the Future Generations Commissioner to challenge the delegates on their draft proposals. Since then, the delegates have been negotiating which issues to highlight in the communiqué, and they've been preparing a draft of the final document ready to share with the G7 and the wider world. In the weeks leading up to the summit, the delegates shared their proposals with the Chancellor of the Exchequer, G7 digital and tech ministers, and presented them at the Labour 7 Summit and the G7 Employment Task Force.
Meanwhile, the Future Leaders Network upskilled a group of 200 #AtTheTable ambassadors. They have been holding conversations all across the UK with other young people on the issues that matter most to them, making sure that everyone is offered a seat at the table. Which brings us to the Y7 Summit 2021.
Today, we are here to witness the unveiling of the Y7 Communiqué, a document that contains the combined voices of thousands of the world's young people. This communique will be given to the world's most influential leaders at the G7 summit and be used to inform their decisions this year. The communique will act as our compass for the next 6 months as we advocate for the change we want to see in the world. Now it is over to you. What will you take away from the Y7 summit? How can you start making waves for future generations?